Hi folks, this is Don Meissner with the North Country Fishing Report. You know, in one of my last reports, I talked about a great friend of mine, Justin Waltz, who lives down near Chameau Bay and in that area. And so he's really familiar with these waters. And we were talking about old memories that we had fishing together. He told me about a time that he came up to Meissner when we had our own sports show, our own national sports show one winter here. And he said he remembered one of the booths, they had these big, giant worms in. He said they were like 9 inches long or so. And he bought a bunch of them, never really knowing how he or where he would fish them. And he told me about when he and his Uncle Tony started using these worms in one of the areas down near Oneida Lake. And he said it was fascinating. He said he put these things on not thinking they would work at all. And I said, Justin, how are you fishing them? He said, I was Texas rigging them with a fairly heavy bullet weight and dragging them along the bottom where you could feel the rock formations and so forth as the sinker clanked over these. And he said the fish were hitting them like crazy. Now, these are giant worms. We would never think, honestly, that any fish in its right mind would attack something like this. But it really brings up the idea of what predators do. And it took me back to a couple memories I've had. One of them is one of the things that I've talked to you about in the past that became a phenomenon a couple years ago, where people go into the sports shows and lining up for hours in the bitter cold to get inside and buy one of these giant handmade baits that they buy. And they pay a couple $100 to $300 for one of these giant baits. And I've asked them, why do you buy them? Is it just to collect them? They're beautiful. They're replicas of fish. And they would all tell me, no, that this is how they think they're going to catch that bucket list trophy of a lifetime. Well, maybe it's not so far-fetched as you might think. You know, in talking about these giant worms, how predator fish will try to attack something much bigger than we would imagine. And I remember a time I was doing a streamside show in the Racket River, and as we were fishing along for smallmouth bass with our small lures, I happened to see an osprey, and we watched it in the sky come down and disappear in the water with a great splash, and up it tried to go with this huge smallmouth that it had just taken. And this bass was about 4 pounds. And this osprey could not get off the water. So it decided it was not going to let go of what it had just captured. That was too much of a trophy for it. And somehow it thought it was going to eat it, I guess. And it, instead of trying to fly off and leave it, it kept it locked in its talons, and it started using its wings as paddles on the water. And it started paddling its way along the water. We followed it from a distance and photographed it. And it was absolutely amazing. It finally came to this downed tree in the water, climbed up somehow on the branch without losing that fish in its talon, or must be in one talon at this point. And it just shows what a predator thinks they can take, something so big. It just amazed me. And it made me think back to another time when I was fishing in Quebec at Le Reserve Beauchesne. And that was a place I went every year to fish for really nice smallmouth bass and northern pike and walleye, and it was a wonderful place, and I've described it many times. But what stands out in this memory, we decided to cast on this shallow, sandy, like bay or beach area, and I don't know what we thought we were going to catch, but I all of a sudden hooked this huge fish, and I ended up catching it, and it was a huge lake trout. And when this lake trout, when Beauchesne was going to have it mounted for me, I didn't ask them to. I always practice catch and release. But anyway, when they sent it off to a taxidermist, they found that in its stomach, it had almost a 3-pound smallmouth bass. The tail was sticking out of its mouth. And I remember that when I landed it, there was a tail in its mouth. I didn't know it was a big bass. But that shows how big a fish these other fish will try to eat. And you don't think of a lake trout quite like this. But these memories brought back this understanding of why maybe these giant worms work for Justin. I thought you all might appreciate that story, and it really tells us that maybe everything we put on our hook could work and catch a fish if we've tried it long enough. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meissner with the North Country Fishing Report.